Okay, so David's been working on a bunch of stuff for ChatGPT, using ChatGPT, and one of the things that I talked to him about was using ChatGPT to write code in TradeStation. He has no experience with TradeStation, so just so you know that. And this is actually good because you have a lot of people out there who have limited experience and are real hesitant to write code, and this will show them how to do it by somebody who's never done it before. Okay, so without further ado, here is David.
Move over.
Okay, I gotta move over so he can get in here and use the computer system.
Yep, I'm using your computer. Okay, so a little bit of background from me. I've been working on GPT since it came out, basically. I have worked with AI software since 2016, including internally at Amazon. When I left at pretty much the peak. I've bizarrely written probably more algorithms for stocks than any of you have, but no, none of them do. So I know what they do in terms of what they say, but I don't understand them intrinsically. So in addition to that, I left Amazon at the peak, so I did very, very well there. So I'm currently running my own company. I'm currently trying to pick up I'm currently implementing GPT related products. I just made one that generates three-dimensional objects from GPT outputs. So I'm doing some pretty serious stuff. So in terms of how to use GPT, that's what I'm going to try to focus on for this conversation. So what I'm going to tell you about is basically first what this product is useful for, what its limitations are, and where you can use it. Because I'm familiar with the general use cases as well as specific ones. Let's start with some very basic stuff. So first, I want to tell you about the GPT models. So the default is 3.5. If you have the free version of this software, you are running GPT 3.5. GPT 3.5, I would describe as wrong about 80% of the time. It is very fast. It's very good for being creative and generating things. For market analysis, it is a horrible tool that you should never touch. As well as for writing coding. For writing code is not something GPT 3.5 is talented at. GPT-4, on the other hand, which came out about a month ago, roughly. If you have the paid version, you have access to GPT-4. The paid version is only $20 a month. If you're using this stuff in any serious capacity, which is to say more than a handful of messages a day, the paid version is overwhelmingly better. I also have the API version, but that's not useful for most of you. So,
quick question.
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, I'd love to hear questions, by the way. So expect this to be a very interactive session.
I heard that being in the Edge browser is a good version of GPT-4. Do you happen to confirm or deny that?
Sure, I'll happily tell you my opinions on that subject. The version that's built into the Edge browser does use GPT-4. However, it is optimized for search. It is heavily optimized for that task, and it is not very good at other things. I find it's very, very good for finding the website you're looking for. And it's also worth noting that actually introduces another important topic here, which is that so one of the big differentiators between Bing and GPT-4, the one that's made by OpenAI. OpenAI is 58% owned by Microsoft, by the way. So describing them as competing products isn't exactly really the case. They're both kind of owned by the same people. So GPT-4 is a great product for, say, generating code, for doing analysis, for doing anything complex. But understand it only knows two things. Information that stops in September 2021, a fact that it will tell you over and over again. This is only sort of true, by the way, but it does not have real-time data at all. Soon the plugins will be rolled out to everyone who uses GPT-4, and then you can use one of the plugins for market analysis data. So in terms of that, so Bing is not a great choice for that. If you want to ask it questions about a specific company, my suggestion is to give it so its window of data size is about 2 pages. And any piece of data that's 2 pages long, it will happily analyze for you, including earnings reports. Though most earning reports are longer than that, obviously, but you can take obscure, confusing, poorly written text that's clearly made for that's made for investors in a loose sense, and convert it into something that's very manageable and easy to understand. You can also use it to analyze things. So I think we should get into a few of the examples. I think I'm getting kind of into the weeds here. So how about we ask it, what are some good market indicators? And when you're asking it questions, one piece of advice I have is this: always ask it to give you multiple answers. I like to give it a number, give 10 answers. And importantly, rate each answer 0 to 1. The reason I say 0 to 1 is because then it gives me a decimal value. Whereas if you say rate 0 to 100, for example, it will give you rating 0 to 100. And sometimes it'll try to even them out to make it, essentially 1 through 10 or other nonsense like that. So if you give it 0 to 1, it'll always give you a decimal and it doesn't try to mess with you.
Hey, Dave, your question there it gives them a good example that they really need to be very specific in their questions.
Yes, that's actually another major point about this. So this is a quote. This is from Sam Altman, the creator of OpenAI. The OpenAI is a company behind ChatGPT. And what he says is this: smart questions give smart answers. So the better written your question is, the cleverer it is, the more smart it sounds, odds are the better it will do. This is only true for certain tasks. For tasks that are more creative, it'll do better. For tasks where it's looking for a specific piece of information, it depends, unless you weren't specific enough in the question to actually get the information. So I'm going to teach you another trick coming up here. So these are pretty normal indices, consumer price index, inflation rate, unemployment rate. These are pretty boring. How about we use some, give me some market indicators.
For the stock market?
For the stock market that are very different from these. So one thing that's important with these, when you're trying to ask for it to be creative, if you want to ask an AI to be creative, you can't do that. It says be creative and just gives you more nonsense. So here's a trick. Ask it for an answer and then ask it for an answer that is not similar at all to the previous answer. If you want to make it creative, that'll do it. So one important thing to note about interacting with these chatbots is that they learn based on the previous information in the chat. They don't learn anything overall. They're only updated occasionally, and they probably don't have what you need, okay? However, if you put the information in the chat, they will have access to it. The more information there is, the better it can build off of it. However, it's also worth noting that they have a 2 to 3 page memory cap. So once you get past a couple of pages of information, it will eventually start to degrade in terms of its memory quality. So basically, the best answers you're going to get, ask it a few questions at the beginning that will help you build the information you need to get your final question answered, and then ask it a final question. Okay, so this gave me a lot of different answers. That these seem quite different than the previous ones we had. That's good. Okay, great. So now from among all 20 answers, give me this is one of my favorite techniques. Give me a super answer that will be the most useful. You can do this with anything.
Most useful for what?
See, that's one problem. If you're not specific, it'll often try to guess what you mean by most useful, right? So yeah, I wasn't specific. So it's telling me interest rates. Okay. So how about we get into something that's more specific? Let's do the TradeStation stuff. So for TradeStation, there are indicators that can be used on what are they called in TradeStation securities?
Yeah, on stocks.
On stocks. Let's say stocks. Okay, why not? There are indicators that can be used on stocks. Give me a list of 10 of these
that work really that successful traders use.
Oh yeah, actually, hold on. That's a good point. Here's another thing about prompting. You can tell the AI who it is. So I'm going to try to make it a little fun. You are a trading master who talks like, got somebody for him to talk like?
I don't know. Jamie Dimon?
I don't know who that is. I
That's
can't spell
okay.
their name.
Dimon, Jamie Dimon.
Is this how you spell it?
Yeah, Diamon. Yeah,
Like that?
it could be.
I don't know who that is, and this will be interesting. So you can ask it to change its tone, which would be very fun for email writing. This is great at writing emails, by the way. I'd love to show you a little bit of that at some point in this conversation. So you're a trading master who talks like Danny Diamond. Give me 5 examples of TradeStation indicators that can be used in easy language for stocks.
To know when prices have reached a top or a bottom.
To know when prices have reached, to predict when prices have reached a top or bottom. You got to be careful about things like words like no, because it will then assume that you're trying to determine whether it's already done so, as opposed you're trying to predict.
Okay.
When it has reached, when a stock
has reached the top for a month.
Has reached the top for a month. That's a good one. I don't know who Jamie Dimon is. This will be fun. Okay. I guess it didn't know who that was either.
Okay.
That or I misspelled the name. I can pick a different name next time. Anyway.
Pick somebody like Warren Buffett.
Does Warren Buffett have a specific speak? Oh, that's a good idea, because you're Warren Buffett. I like that one. That's a good one. You are Warren Buffett. The previous guy who responded to me was an absolute chump, and you need to do a better job, do a better and more original job than him. Give me 5 indicators for TradeStation that are unique, interesting, and okay, they're unique
and specific.
Specific, very different from the indicators you just listed, and will help me predict whether a stock is about to hit its top for a month. Yeah, if you tell it the previous responses were bad and to do it differently, it will often do so. So if you're tired of the answers, you can ask for very different ones. All right.
I have a suggestion.
Yes.
Both those guys are not known for indicators, but Larry Williams is. So we'll probably get a better answer from Larry Williams.
Okay, so let's do that then. I'm gonna these see. Oh, ha! Speak of the devil. Look.
It says it in there, yeah.
Good. All right. So now let's be clever. Give me TradeStation code that uses the best indicators of the 10 you just listed. Okay. This is kind of going what we're looking for here. You can also ask it for better information on what parameters to put in these as well. I was doing that last night. You can ask it, be like, well, what period do you think this should be under? You know, under what circumstances would it be a good idea to pick this variable or that one? Can be very, very helpful. Okay, so that looks like a pretty simple code right there. Doesn't do anything complicated. Yep. What do you think of this? Does that look make sense to me?
Hey Mike, do you have any indicators that you want coded in easy language?
Fibonacci.
Fibonacci is difficult to program, but it'd be interesting to see what it comes up with. The problem, like with that code given, is not that it doesn't work, it's that it works on a specific time frame, and the time frames keep changing, much like moving average crossovers. So you actually need to have two time frame analysis at the same time in order to improve the robustness.
Okay. Write an algorithm in easy language that will
use, let's say, RSI.
I would
And-
suggest using strategy instead of algorithm. I've done this before, and it understands strategy.
that will use RSI and what?
That will use RSI in an hourly and 15-minute time frame.
How about that Fibonacci thing?
Well, okay,
I just want to know what that's called.
it's Fibonacci thing is simply saying, gee, you've got a 50% pullback, or 61.8, or 30, whatever,
I see. So you're just saying to use the Fibonacci sequence in general.
Fibonacci has a capital F.
You're right. Be smart in how you write to it. I'm gonna demonstrate that in a moment. Just wait. The Fibonacci sequence in your solution.
Actually, I think you need to say Fibonacci retracement.
Retracement, even better. Thank you. See, the more technical language you use, the better it does. Use Fibonacci retracement in your solution. And then what I'm going to say is, you are a prompt master. Give me a smarter way of saying this.
See, the tricky part is the Fibonacci retracements are difficult to predict, but a Fibonacci extension is far more reliable.
Okay, Fibonacci extension. Oh, I see what you mean. Let's see what it can do. First, I'm going to ask it to rephrase the prompt, because right now it's pretty good, but I think it could do a better job than I can. See, look at this. It's using smart words, lots of smart words, more than I use. Great. That's so detailed. Lovely. So it'll continue talking like that if I give this as the input. Nope. So now I give this as the input. Okay. Okay. Let's see what it does. So one thing about it is that if it doesn't know something exists, it may end up hallucinating a result. Oh, it's actually creating retracement. Good. I was wondering what I was going to do with that. Is fib retracement a function in easy language that's available? Actually, I can ask it that, can't I?
Well, Fibonacci is used for retracements. So I would say that.
You need to actually identify a pivot in order to determine a retracement, and then that requires code on figuring pivots first, unless somebody knows a different way.
Between the high and the low of the last length bars, it's trying to find a pivot of some kind. I think that retracement thing might not exist. So it came up with the concept, but if you notice, I think it created a function that's not there. I don't know if it's there or not. I'll ask it about it. Let's see what it says. Does not exist. That's the answer. So it often hallucinates things. But here's a trick with hallucination, is that you can ask it to write what you ask it to, what it hallucinated. And one thing that's a big advantage of this is it can make coding into something where you edit code instead of writing it all from a blank slate. So it can give you a nice framework to write something in, and then you can modify it from there, especially for easy stuff.
In my experience too, it sometimes gets syntax wrong as well. Like it called a function that was missing a parameter, so it wouldn't compile properly, but I'm absolutely blown away by the choice of variable names and the organization of the structure. It's generally very intelligently organized for a framework, like you were saying, and then you have a starting point to customize more ideas from.
Exactly. That's how I use it. So I should tell you how I use this. To put this in perspective, I was writing an average of about 50 lines of code a day prior to using ChatGPT. I'm currently writing somewhere in the neighborhood of 400. And those are numbers that don't make sense. Those are numbers that you would never hear ever in your life. The idea of writing 10 pages of code a day is not plausible normally. However, because I basically use this to write the architecture and edit it, it's become possible for me to do. So it's worth noting that if you're writing a lot of similar things, for example, you can use it to write them very, very quickly. So yeah, this is kind of a good example, I think, for the coding. There's probably errors in this. It's worth noting, in terms of coding, 3.5 makes constant mistakes. It is terrible and makes mistakes no matter how small of an example we give it. With 4, it gives an error, I would say approximately once every 20 to 30 lines, which is about as good as a human coder. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if the reason it makes those errors is because it's coded on Stack Overflow data, which is filled with human coders who make mistakes. So yeah, this actually looks like a very good framework. It even has an entry, it has an exit. It's very well commented, tells you exactly what it's doing. So yeah, it's probably not the best way of doing this, but it definitely will save you a lot of time. And again, if you're using this, make sure you're using GPT-4. Another big limitation of this is it can only take in about 2 pages as an input. So for example, if you want to edit code with this, another big advantage of this is editing code. So you could, for example, grab this and say, this is a function I wrote in easy language. Tell me what it does, how it could be improved, and suggest an improvement, then make that improvement. This is something I'll often do. Usually I have specific improvements in mind, but you can also ask it for ideas too. Used for identifying potential buy and sell signals in markets beyond the RSI and 2 different time frames. That's yep.
I like the way this is written, and it looks easier to understand than most of the code which is published in the back of stocks and commodities. But the problem I see with this is that with TradeStation, you either have to pick the 15-minute bars or the 1-hour bars, and in order to run your back test on, or even run the strategy. So you got to pick one or the other. Unless somebody disagrees with me and tell me what the solution to that is.
Well, I can tell you the solution to that. So I've had to deal with this problem myself with 15-minute bars and hour-long bars. An hour-long bar is 4 15-minute bars combined in the correct mathematical way, where you take the entry for the first 15-minute bar, the close for the last 15-minute bar, and the high and low of the 4 combined, and then you have an hour bar. But I don't know how to utilize that information in TradeStation.
That's a beautiful answer. I wish Steve Panaccio would have told us. Is he on the line?
Maybe not.
In fact, I'll ask it to do exactly that. Give me a simple function that turns hour bars. It should be able to do this, right? Because what I just said, into 15-minute bars in TradeStation. It should give the same answer I just gave.
Shouldn't you ask for 15-minute bars turned into an hour bar?
Oh, you're right. That's impossible. I see your point.
Yeah, you don't
I
have
can't
the
believe I made
resolution.
that mistake. Glad you're paying attention.
What the
Should have let
results
it
were.
answer and see what happened. Oh yeah, if you give it questions that don't make sense, it will still try to answer them as if they do. So keep that in mind. It can definitely give you a lot of very strange and wrong answers if you do that.
Now, something else, when you ask it a question, one of the things you can do is you can ask it to give you a better way of communicating that question.
Somebody needs to be muted.
Yeah, I did it. I'm trying to stay on top of it. It's hard.
Oh, it's just asking you to grab data from multiple sources. That's another solution that seems like it probably worked better because, but I wanted to use just one data source. So.
Yeah, that's the problem with TradeStation as far as I know. And I have not seen a suggestion proposed within our group that would solve this issue, except other than looking at and analyzing two different charts and strategies.
Here we go. Now it looks like it's doing what I said. It's doing what I said.
Awesome.
There we go.
Here.
All right. So now that I've shown you a bunch of fun TradeStation stuff, how about I show you some other capabilities this has? So I'm sure you all write emails. So I often, maybe I'm very upset about, let's see, there was a taco shop recently where I ordered enchiladas, but they gave me a wet sock instead. Write a letter to the city health inspector of Carlsbad, California, to get that will help get this place investigated. Write in the style. So this one might be a little bit crass. So I'm trying to think of who be a good person to write in the style of whether they might be whether it might be a good choice. Maybe something silly. Huh?
Johnny Cochran.
Johnny Cochran. How do you spell it? How do you spell his last name?
C-O-C-H-R-A-N.
Okay. This is something I love doing, where I give it a list of bullet point notes. You can give it a list of 10 plus notes and it'll work, and convert that into an email. It is very nice. I would describe one of the thing's best abilities as formatting documents. I've also gotten it to create formalized like XML or JSON or formal documents written out of very generic code. Another thing that it can do is you can give it a Excel sheet of some, not Excel sheet, a table of some kind or a list of data, and you can ask it to add columns to that data with its own analysis. This is good.
Try Joe Takapina next.
Today, I find myself penning this plea on behalf of concerned residents of Carlsbad, California, who fell victim to an unspeakable health violation in a local taco shop. This is great. You see, the thing is, when you don't tell it how to write, it always writes like it's a corporate middle manager. So keep that in mind. It writes a lot like the people who work at like Amazon or Google. So you have to give it a style if you want it to do regular writing. I almost always ask it to be a specific person. So who did you say?
That was Johnny.
No, the second person.
Joe Takapina.
I don't know how to spell that guy's name.
How do you spell Joe Takapina?
T-A-C-I-P-E-N-A, I think. I could Google it in case.
Okay, so write a classified ad for a TradeStation programmer to help me convert daily, let's see, what's it?
Let me build it.
15-minute bars
Okay.
to 60-minute bars in the style of Joe Tacopina. Yeah, see, this is often very helpful because you want to communicate in a specific style usually, and corporate middle manager is usually not the choice for most activities. However, if you want to sound very formal, I often just use the default style for I am the co-chair of my neighborhood association. So if there's someone who writes an angry letter, I'll often reply to it using the default style because it never insults anyone usually. It is very apologetic and very kind, which is very helpful in situations where I might not agree with the person who's messaging me.
I found the correct spelling for Tacopina. It's T-A-C-O, like taco, and then P-I-N-A.
I see. I think it still got it right. I mean, this seems pretty smart. It's talking in a much better way than it normally would, saying things like virtuoso.
I wouldn't guess that that Tacopina would use the word virtuoso.
Fair enough. It could be grabbing it from the other person. I'm not sure who Joe Tacopina is.
He's Trump's lawyer that lost the E. Jean Carroll case.
Oh, okay. You know what? Let's hear the silliest possible example. Talk like Donald Trump. And I'll give it something incredibly hard, like something very, very technical. Explain to, so I have background in physics. Explain to me quantum tunneling in a blog post oriented towards senior Floridian voters. Talk like Donald Trump. There we go. Oh boy. Well, it certainly did pick a style. It made him this. The thing is, it can't sound less than a certain amount coherent. Pretty much no matter who it picks, it will always sound kind of smart, no matter what you do. So, but it did try. It's definitely using a lot of the Trumpisms, big word. Using a lot of like using very a lot. Fantastic. It uses a lot of his words, but it doesn't get it perfect. Probably because it's trying very hard to do something that will be very hard for almost anyone to explain. But anyway,
it's trying to make sense.
It's trying very hard with two very incongruous ideas, but it does still manages to do that. Now these are correct. This is actually a very good response. It's worth noting it talks like Donald Trump, but it does not think like Donald Trump. So it will naturally use his tone, but it'll still be constructing these large, complex ideas it's trying to explain. And when it's doing that, it has a very specific way of structuring how it talks. So it's worth noting, it'll always give answers in little snippets like this, usually, for example, as well. But yeah, if you wanted to give like a helpful explanation, tell it to talk like a newscaster or talk like a marketing expert. So I'm going to open up the floor to questions. Who has questions?
This is Lily. I think your topic about the ChatGPT is very interesting. But when you ask a question about those kind of tool or code to predict high, low, or strategy, so it will be a little bit difficult to transfer those information back to the faster trading market or those for the actual trading. So I think I joined this user group last time and showed a tool I'm using. That tool can predict the high, low, and use different trend lines. Last time I showed some pictures and the desktop videos about that, and those trend lines can actually predict those high, low, the target high and the target low, and also when the stock price reaches those trend lines and have a very high probability and the success rate to reach exactly the target high and the low and then turn direction. So yeah, so that tool seems is more straightforward to be applicable to actual trading. But this ChatGPT is also very interesting. I mean, I heard about ChatGPT a lot some time ago, but this is the first time I saw all this kind of question and answer in ChatGPT.
Yes, David, thank you for sharing this. This is fascinating. And there's a question in the chat from Rolf. I don't know if you can see the chat, but he's asking you to ask it something specific, and he's giving you an iMacros command.
I'll copy that. I'm
Okay.
not writing that.
Yeah, I tried it in version 3 and it gave the wrong information, didn't work.
3.5 is almost always wrong about code. Do not code with 3.5. Ooh, it's using regex. Is it really that simple?
Yeah, it's a very simple answer. It still did. I'm not sure. I think it added a 3 at the end. So I'm gonna. I was gonna say, can you put that into the?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the 3 is about. Again, it's worth noting that it makes mistakes in the same way a person does. So it's very good for helping you code. It's a code assistant. So for example, I can ask it, did you make any mistakes? It often says yes. While iMacros is able to locate elements based on their positional attribute, UI.vision RPA uses a more flexible system of XPath. Okay, but does it say why? Okay, was this correct? Is it wrong?
I don't know. I have to put it in and test it in the UI Vision command module and see if it works.
Got it. So one thing I very commonly use this for is I will be writing a piece of code and I'll need a function. So remember that whole thing where it invented that Fibonacci function thing? I often will ask it to write functions for me. One of the best things you can do for this, how I think of the best way of doing it, is you have to be the code architect. You're the person who is writing the concept, and it's very, very good at things where there is a defined known answer or something where it could very easily figure out the answer based off of first principles. So like that Fibonacci thing, that's something that it can do. Asking it to come up with generalized ideas of what to do is a little more complex. My suggestion is this. So like in the previous example, what you can do is you can grab something like the, one second, it's a little hard to scroll up on this computer. Where is it? So you can take something like this, okay? And you can basically build a framework, all right? And then create some functions inside of this that that don't exist yet, okay? Like the retracement Fibonacci one, right? Okay. And what you're going to do with that is then make that function blank and add a comment next to it saying, could you please write this function for me? Using the context that it already has, it can often do so, and with few mistakes and with a good level of code organization. It can't do the job for you. You still have to read the code. You still have to understand it, but it can. But the two things with this are you can ask it for functions for you, and you can ask it what the code does, which can be very, very helpful, especially with something like EasyLanguage, which has some opaque functions, you might imagine. It also can come up with a lot of different solutions for a problem if you ask it to. So that's something I really like doing a lot of. So
what about code review? It'd be great if we could do code review based on previous comments from conversations within like the actual repository, like on a pull request or something. You know what I'm saying? Like it could train itself somehow on a code base that's had comments put into it over a history, and and then have it be able to like you can make modifications, you can submit a modification and have it do like a code review, and it takes in consideration any previous comments. You know what I'm saying, to get context.
Right now, the problem is the context window is so small and no one solved that problem yet.
Yeah.
And the problem is a code base becomes too large to analyze in its totality, 2 files in. That's basically, you can analyze a couple hundred lines of code. And I agree with you that's what I want to do. I want to do something like that myself. In addition to that, there's a product that I've recently entered the beta for called Copilot X.
Mm-hmm.
There's Copilot X for Docs and Copilot X for Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code. I use one for Visual Studio Code, and it lets you, look at your code, highlight it, and ask it, hey, could you add this feature to this section of code for me? It is basically doing exactly the thing I'm describing. I would describe it as moderately effective at this, and it has not gotten to the point where it is easy to use yet.
I would like to.
I'll still be using my own custom solutions for a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I would like to end torturing people with code reviews. That this would like seem to somehow, if you could get the history in there, because so what's limited? You said 2 pages, so I guess this is limited by the browser, or where's that limitation being set?
Okay, so here's the limitations. If you want technical limitations, I will tell you the exact limitations. The limitations of GPT-4 are 4,096 tokens. A token is approximately 4 characters. So you're looking at about 16,000 tokens, which is actually somewhere in the neighborhood of like 20 to 40 pages. However, they consider that's the size of the total context. So the context used on the website is dramatically smaller because it's trying to import data from previous parts of the conversation. So it needs to reserve the majority of its token count for that purpose. It's also worth noting that the output token count is also about the same size. And what I've noticed in terms of its generations, it usually generates things that are at longest, it'll cut itself off at the 3-minute mark, which is about 3 pages of text. So my suggestion is this: if you want some code edited, you have to figure out the context of it yourself and paste that context into a question. And if it clearly is some piece of information it doesn't have, you can just tell it that information. It understands things like a person does. Yeah. So you can just tell it, this is the API that this is calling. And this is what it does. This is what these parameters do, et cetera, et cetera. And you can just copy paste existing code into there so long as it fits comfortably. I'll often copy 3 or 4 functions and say, using these functions, make this. In terms of coding, one of the best things you can do with this, okay, this is my trick to coding so much and so quickly. Make something that works well, that fits in the chat window, and tell it to make another version of it that does something differently. That works great.
Yeah, it seems like you kind of like want to set it up kind of like from a framework approach. You kind of just want to give it a solid framework, and then from there you could make variations.
Yep. Yeah. If you want to use the framework approach technically, by the way, and using the API and all that, if you're talking about like actually coding using it in Python, that can be done using something called LangChain. So LangChain allows you to chain messages together. It allows you to add memory. It allows you to do indexing. I'm currently trying to figure it out. It is opaque and difficult. And I would say that basically there's going to be 2 layers to this ChatGPT thing. One of which is basically the layer of software engineers who are trying to figure out how to make this tool as useful to as many people as possible. And the other one is going to be consumer tools. And in terms of consumer tools, nothing beats ChatGPT using GPT-4 right now. It is overwhelmingly the best choice for almost every task. There are a few tasks where it isn't, but almost anything you could be doing will be using this tool.
Yeah, I've been debating on buying the paid version, but I think you just sold me the paid version right now. I'm going to switch probably after this meeting.
I have a question which is unrelated to this, but I've been contacted many times over the past several months because I once replied to an email about having a book written for me, like a ghostwriter, and they're offering to ghostwrite books for $10 a page. And I'm wondering if these ghostwritten books aren't entirely AI, because, the AI writing looks, just like every other writing. Do you know anything about that? And if so, how would this ChatGPT create characters in the book for a nonfiction book when it doesn't even know what's in my head? Can it do something like that, or how would you write the question?
Sure, I will happily answer that. So basically, what the ghostwriters are probably doing is coming up with an outline for the book and then asking it to generate individual pages. For nonfiction, this works well because you don't have a continuous narrative. Continuous narratives and having a tiny memory size where you can only look at a small amount of stuff don't go very well together. But nonfiction tends to have not a continuous narrative and goes chapter by chapter. So what this means is you can just give it a big pile of information, break it up into sections, and tell it to write. Basically, you can just remember that blog post I just wrote? Ask it to write a blog post in that style for each page that you want made. If you know what's going to be in your book well enough to do that, you can literally have it write using that. And if you don't, you can use the small amount of information you do have to essentially create that page outline and then use that with ChatGPT to generate the pages. It's worth noting that there might be, chapters, I should say, not pages. It's worth noting that there might be limitations to this because its output window is currently fairly small. You'll have chapters that are a page or two long, or maybe 3 or 4 pages if you're lucky. However, there are new tools coming out with this that cost a little bit more to run, where you can produce way more than that. If I were to guess, the ghostwriters are probably using a mixture of templating, a thing that's existed forever, which is basically just, this is a generic way that you write various things and you copy paste what you care about into them, make some small edits. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that they do is probably asking ChatGPT to, check their work or to fix up their writing, that kind of stuff. I see ghostwriting as a career virtually disappearing within the next year or two and being replaced with essentially a person giving the outline of their book in a loose sense to a bot that then writes a table of contents and uses that context in combination with the table of contents, breaks it up into sections, and then creates a book based on it. I expect that to be a product within a year or two. In terms of actual ghostwriters, I would be surprised if you were using this tool for anything other than, checking work or helping to amplify his work, probably in a way that you or I might use it. The number of writing tools that exist using this right now are very limited. And he could also be using Novel AI, which is a AI tool used specifically for writing, but it's very narrative focused, and it's probably not the best one for what you're describing. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, at least personally, within a year that I'll be able to write quote unquote ghost write a book in the style of any person, probably with higher quality than most ghostwriters, probably within a few years. And I wouldn't be surprised if almost every ghostwriter ends up using this tool simply because it'll be hard for them to compete without doing so.
Okay, so I could just tell it to write. I can lay out my table of contents, the general format, and then I can tell it to write like Tom Clancy, right? And it'll do that.
Yeah. So with the table of contents thing, here's what you do. Okay, so you ask it for each. So let's say you generate a table of contents. Okay. And then you can generate from each table of contents, you grab each one and make a new conversation. And then that new conversation, you basically give it all the information you want to be in that chapter. Keep in mind that if it doesn't know what to do, it will usually write something fairly short, maybe between 5 paragraphs and 10. If you give it a lot of information about what you want in that chapter, it'll often write something much longer. And this way of writing can be beneficial in the sense that you can just rewrite a whole chapter like that if you don't like how the data is presented. You can also use this to rewrite already ghostwritten materials as well, by the way. If you don't like how a certain section is written, you can use ChatGPT to analyze it and fix it up, add information you wanted to, or to even continue using the style that's already there.
Okay, good. Thank you.
So I wonder if copyright laws would come into play there. It's just a question. And then there is a question in the chat from Isaac up a little ways. He says, can you show us how to capture a chart that is declining and capture the moment where it starts to turn around using candlesticks and increasing volume? So now we're going to get back to TradeStation.
On the question, okay, so on the question of, repeat the first question again.
The first question was
these are
just
two very different
kind of a
questions.
thought. It was kind of a thought in the seed is I wonder what copyright law, how copyright laws might come into play there if you were to tell ChatGPT to write a book in the style of Tom Clancy, for example.
So you have no worries from Tom Clancy. Unless I will note, it will often say as Tom Clancy. Definitely make sure you're checking what it's writing. However, he has no right to his writing, quote unquote, style, if that even means anything in particular. In terms of copyright issues involving the generation, that topic is, to my knowledge, you own them, but I'll just double check that right now. Do you own GPT-4 outputs? I believe you do, but I'm going to double check.
I would guess they don't.
So one thing that's worth noting here about the copyright question, okay? So the copyright question is this. So, okay. So the copyright question comes up to this whole point of whether or not your output is already containing copyrighted material. And the answer to that is sometimes yes. I have gotten it to successfully generate Weird Al's the song "The Saga Begins" when I asked it for a parody of Miss American Pie with a Star Wars 1 theme, and it just literally gave me Weird Al song verbatim. So you do need to worry about potentially containing copyrighted outputs in your output. Let's see. Okay, so it's worth noting AI generated content is not copyrighted by default. And if you start editing it, however, it will be under your copyright. But keep in mind, again, that if you're modifying copyrighted materials, or if you are reading things that are containing copyrighted materials, like if you ask it for factual information, it may grab directly from sources. So you got to be careful to understand that if you're writing a book with this, you need to make it off of what you know, and not just, ask me to write a whole chapter based off of one sentence. Because the more it generates, the more likely it is to be coming up with either total nonsense or copyrighted material.
So, Catherine, what was your other question?
Yeah, let's look at that other question.
It was actually a question that's in the chat from Isaac, and it's active stock related information. It says, can you show us how to capture a chart that is declining and capture the moment where it starts to turn around using candlesticks and increasing volume?
So it's worth noting that one thing about ChatGPT is you actually try to give it candlestick data, it will not work. I've tried this myself, and I asked it, what was the high of these 10 days? And it was wrong. And this is because ChatGPT does not have a source of truth. ChatGPT is a pile of information. And because of that, it often gets things wrong, especially if you don't tell it to be right, which sounds ridiculous. But if you tell it it's talented, or that it's a knowledgeable person in a topic, or that it's, or you are a bot that gives only these kinds of answers, it is much more likely to give a correct answer, because understand that its training data includes wrong answers. So I'm going to show you how I can make,
so would he actually capture a bar chart instead of the candlestick? Because it has the same data that's in there.
So on the point about bar charts, same point. I'll give you an example of why it doesn't do math well. So one time I decided to look up try to generate the number of leaf blowers per capita in Eugene, Oregon. Try to guess that, okay? So it gave great data for 1960, 1970, 1980, 1990. But then it started extrapolating more and more from the previous data instead of from some external logic. It's a next letter predictor. So it relies heavily on what it just wrote, which often results in, it's helpful for asking it to explain its work. But if you're giving it a series of data, it will often reproduce patterns that already exist in that data. So one of the patterns that exists in the leaf blower data was it was increasing by 50% every 10 years. However, this resulted in the year 2020 saying there were 5 leaf blowers per capita, which is obviously false. So what you should do instead of this is to ask it to write little programs for you. and execute those instead, because you know what they do and you can read them and verify that they work. So that's what I'm going to do here. So give me a smart prompt for this to make this in easy language. Oh, I guess it already just is. Okay, let's see. Here we go.
I like that.
Yeah, this is something you should virtually always do. Rewrite my prompt, please. Because it's a next letter predictor. It's only as smart as how you ask the question, and how you ask it matters enormously. It's also helpful because it'll do a lot to try to, when you ask it to ask for a new prompt, it will try to figure out details. See how it's looking for specific patterns instead of just look for a thing? Yeah. And when you do that, way more likely to succeed. So let's do it.
Sweet.
And again, these only work with GPT-4. GPT 3.5 is a fun model for making limericks. It is not something you should be using for anything involving trading. Also, remember I had said all those things about copyright and about next letter prediction involving being wrong at math. It is not a fiduciary. It is not responsible financially, and it can easily lead to your ruin. So be very careful. Remember, it can only give you what you want. It's not smart. It's not intelligent. It can't learn from you. It loses its memory the moment you enter a new chat. So it's just pulling things from the chat to enter into the prompt. It doesn't actually have a memory. I'm currently working on making something to give it at least more of a long-term memory with the prompt limitation. But okay. Looked like it kind of did what you were saying. I don't know if alert was the right thing to do, but declining trend, that looks like a declining trend. Okay, and that seems like a boring answer. So you are a TradeStation master. Review the previous answer, and give one that is different and overwhelmingly more effective. You have to give it a lot of encouragement. You got to understand, it's using my letters to predict its own, right? So it has to be it's as smart as I am. You could imagine what implications this might have sociologically. By the way, I am scared of this implication. I hope that someone fixes this problem eventually, because otherwise it's going to result in a world where when different people look stuff up, they'll get wildly different answers. Here we go. That looks smarter. Now it has two previous highs and previous lows. There you go. So yeah. Do we have any more questions?
Well, if you don't have a high identified with a pivot, then in reality, I don't think this is really usable. Just
okay, how about I'll just tell it what you said.
Well, I thought it had the pivot point that it was showing earlier. It was saying when it's go down, they go to bullish. That's the pivot point.
Reversal identified.
Yep.
That is a pivot. You're right. That's a pivot. Simplified hammer pattern. And increasing volume. Oh, there's a lot more going on in this line, actually. All right. Let's see how it did. To identify lower highs and lower lows using pivot points. Local maxima, minima. Yeah, that's great. Now it's going to use the built-in functions, pivot high and pivot low. I assume those are a thing? Are they? Are those real functions?
I don't know.
It might be hallucinating. Let's see.
Well, Mike just told it they exist, so what the heck?
Okay, that's not helpful.
Maybe it likes swing high function and swing low function.
You can also just do this. There we go. They're built-in functions, apparently. And it'll make it for you anyway. Oh, let's see. Hold on. Yep. There you go. Yeah.
But again, the usefulness is getting a start here, not that it's going to get everything perfect. So for example, this pivot high that it's defining is just a strength 1 on the left and the right side. You may not like that. So it's not that it's good. You're just going to compile this and trade it. It's that it's giving you some interesting ideas. You still have to be familiar with the code, in my opinion, so that you can decide whether you like what it's done or whether you want to add or clarify certain parts, or if it's got the function name and parameter set exactly right. This is just like having a good, intelligent friend next to you doing a lot of legwork, and then you're still a smarter person, and you see where to fine tune it and adjust it and everything like that.
Yeah, I got
Exactly.
you. It needs to to look at it for the hammer currently, not in the past or whatever. That's one thing also. So there's plenty of hammers, but if the hammer comes up right now on the decline, that's different than a hammer in the middle of the chart.
Mm-hmm. And if you don't know what something does when it generates the code, you can just do this. Ask it to explain the section of code for you. So the thing about coding with this is that you can't just, you can't just trust it'll work. It's very much an assistant or a friend. I think of it, I think of it as having an army of low level developers, like an engineer level 1 to work with you. They still make mistakes, but having 20, you can literally just ask them to fix the mistake, right? And you can ask them to explain how it works. You can ask them for details. Well, what do you think about that part? But if you don't understand its output, and if you can ask it for some understanding of it, but it's at the end of the day, you're still going to have to be able to read the code. If you can't read the code, this won't be that useful.
David,
right? And that's one thing I want to reiterate in a big way. You can't just generate things and run them without reading them. Never do that. I will always advise against that, no matter what your application is, but especially for trading.
David, version 4 is only available in the paid version currently. Will that be available later also in the free version, or it's going to be only for paid people, paid customers?
If you plan on using this for trading purposes in any significant capacity, I would get the paid version because it's way faster. It generates much more quickly. And 2, 4 is unavailable. I don't know if or when 4 will be available in the free version. If it is, it'll be months from now.
And we're talking $20 a month.
Yeah, this is a pittance. It's at a monthly price, and if you don't use it, you can just cancel it the next month. It's not a yearly subscription; it's monthly. So very easy to do.
2 cups of coffee.
Yeah, if it actually brings you significant benefits in coding, trading or writing code for trading, it will pay for itself probably within a couple of days. Hours. Okay.
For writing a book.
Oh, for writing a book, certainly. Oh, one thing worth noting, on the for writing a book point, I want to pop a bubble before you get to it. So even with ChatGPT Plus, there is the unfortunate fact that GPT-4 has a cap of 25 messages every 3 hours. How this works is every time you send a message and haven't sent a message for 3 hours, it will start a timer, the first message you send. And then that timer resets whenever you do so. I got to do more than 25 messages just now because I sent a message at 6:10 a.m. 15 a.m. right before we started this. So I managed to split out the 50 messages. However, if you're writing a book, my suggestion is to use a ChatGPT API because it allows you to create templates for sections that you want to write. So like you can put the same thing at the top for all of them in a system message that says, you are an author that writes like this. This is what you already know about your book. This is the general style of it. And this is the chapter you're writing this for. And then you can give the specific details on the chapter in the user prompt. This makes your life a lot easier. It's worth noting with the API, at least in the API playground, information disappears the moment you leave the web page. But it's also worth noting the API, if you plan on using this constantly for lots and lots of time, it's pay per use, but I use this all day, every day, and I've only managed to rack up about $10 of expenses. So weirdly, the paid version is actually more expensive than using the API. Yeah, that's a strategy I would go with if I were writing a book. If you're just editing for a book, you can just use the paid version. If you are, literally just going to go to a computer and just send 100 of these out, you're probably looking at either using Python with LangChain or just using the playground and opening up 50 tabs.
So I'm looking on Google now. Is it like ChatGPT an app that I put on my phone or desktop? It's not clear to me.
Here's how it works. You go to chat.openai.com. There is no app on your phone. If you want it on your phone, you can create a link using a normal hyperlink. It works just fine. It looks like an app. It acts like an app, but it's a website. My suggestion is, just Google OpenAI GPT-4 and you'll find it. I can just be like, OpenAI GPT-4. Comes up pretty much immediately. Oh, this is their research page. Okay, I don't know why this uses Yahoo search. You can just go to OpenAI. Platform.openai.com is the API, and you can just go to OpenAI.com and it'll connect you to the chat app. I don't know why this is frozen. Well, I guess that's. Oh, there we go. Okay, let's see. Product ChatGPT, and now you're at the chat app. With the chat app, it's free for the 3.5 and a little slow in that version. If you have the paid version, 3.5 is practically instant, and 4 is about as fast as you can read it. So pretty convenient when it comes to speed. I don't know how quickly you can get access to 4. It's worth noting these things are rate limited. So bizarrely, even though it costs $20 a month, you may have to get on a wait list to get that, to have the privilege of paying the money. It's a funny situation.
So Ron, quick question. I didn't quite understand the nuance of the difference of what you were talking about. If I opened up Microsoft Edge and used Bing, I was under the impression that version of ChatGPT was version 4. Could you just kind of help me understand that a little better by like what if you did all these queries, these TradeStation queries that you did in Bing and in OpenAI 4 version on the Bing? How do you think it would have performed differently?
I can tell you that the answer to that question. Yeah, I'm David, by the way. I'm Ron's son. Anyway,
hi, David.
Someone's at the front door.
So basically, what you can do with the GPT-4 is, GPT-4 on Bing is a lot more limited. It's optimized for searching specifically. So it's very, very good for finding a website that you need. However, it's very, very bad at, say, writing a trading algorithm. It is not designed for that purpose. The big difference between ChatGPT and that is Bing. Bing searches the web by default. That is its main purpose. And it's built around that concept. And it probably can write code for you, but it won't do a great job. Whereas ChatGPT does not have access to modern data. It has access to up to 2021, and that's it. Okay. So that's a big limitation for trading, you might imagine. So it's good to think of ChatGPT as a way of interacting with timeless data, things that have existed for a long time, or at least for 2 years.
Great. very much.
Bing, on the other hand, gets new data, but it's not as useful. Are there any more questions?
One, it's kind of unrelated. And I saw this kind of pop up on a dating app, and it said, "Oh, how do you feel about using AI for automated answers?" And I didn't know what the hell they were even talking about. But so if a woman hasn't replied to my personal ad, Tinder, whatever, dropped off communication, what would I type into AI to give me a clever prompt or message to get her to respond?
As you wish. Here's a fun one.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
No response is a response.
That is true, guys.
Yeah, wisdom isn't part of open.
You got to tell it to be short. That's an important point. ChatGPT loves giving essay answers. Don't message people essays. Don't do that. Give 10 one-sentence answers. Written.
Dude, that's horrible. Use this for
styles
like,
of
dating apps.
Various selected famous men, and rate their success, their likelihood of getting attention. And this gives me a good example for the charts, actually. Not charts, sorry, I shouldn't be using that word for this. The Excel sheet generator. That's a better way of saying it. Rate their likelihood of getting attention and their likelihood of getting a laugh. Put as 0 to 1. Put your answers in a table. You'll get to see this. This is a fun one. Wonder who it's going to pick. These aren't bad at all. I may trade commodities, but I assure you I'm no commodity. I like that. That's good. My love life's not like the stock market. I'm not into selling short. Okay, yeah, these aren't bad at all. These are decent one-liners. Some of them are. Some of them are terrible and only work for appropriate situations.
Not bad at all. That's fun. I feel like Mike's question turned this into Oprah AI or Dr. Phil AI.
Oh, you want to hear AI psychologist? Sure thing. What do you want it to do?
Oh, I was just joking. I thought Mike's question pivoted the conversation.
David,
well, I'm showing you a lot of the features of this thing. Like if you noticed in this one, it put it in a chart and put it in a table, and it also gave scores in that table for how likely it is to do each one. You know, some of these aren't likely to give a laugh, but some are likely to give attention. You know. And by the way, that works really well with a big list of. Okay, I'll give you an example. I work like on websites like a part-time CTO thing. So when I do that, I got a list of 50 bugs that I found. Okay, and I wanted to know where in the app these bugs were because I didn't write it down. So I gave it the list of descriptions, and it figured out with 90% accuracy where the bug was, how long it took to solve it. That one was slightly less accurate. It said that was 80%. And also how important the bug was. It was very, very good at figuring out details like that on a table. Really good at it. So strongly recommend using it for that purpose, like we see here. So how about we use the psychology point? Because that's actually a very relevant use case for this that many of you probably care about. So you are an AI psychologist on a TV show like Dr. Phil or Oprah. Imagine that there is a stock trader with some serious mental health issue that shows up on the show, give a what are those things called where they have a big list of lines? Write a script.
Bullet list, is that what you're asking for, a bullet list?
No, there's like a specific word for it. Right, like in this context, write a script for this show where the psychologist come up with a name, helps this person deal with their problem.
Quick question.
I've reached the limit. I'm sorry.
Just a quick question about your query. What do you think would change if you didn't use AI as an adjective for psychologist? What do you think that added or didn't add?
I think that the more you tell it, it's
go ahead.
Adding AI to the prompt. Well, I often tell it it's a bot or it's an AI because if you don't tell it that, it will often respond more like a real person. And it's worth noting that the more you tell it it's a bot, the more it reacts like a bot. The more you tell it it's a person, the more it pretends to be that person. That's often the distinction.
In the context of psychology, would you not want it to be more like a person, or what is? Help me understand.
I see your point
there.
I think you're right. I don't think it should be an AI psychologist, just be a regular psychologist. We'll ask 3.5 so you can see how quick it is. You are a psychologist. Actually, because it's 3.5 can do generative stuff and it's very quick. Okay, this is much faster. This is very fast. I can't read this quickly. Let me go to the top.
Wow.
Yeah, 3.5 is great for generating a lot of text that is moderately coherent.
So this is something you could use for your book, Mike.
Yeah. Thank you. I was thinking maybe first I would come up with a format, a popular novel format, maybe using some famous author, and then from there break it down into chapters and do character development, and then have it kind of fill in. I can get on a roll once I have a general format, and so I think that this will help a lot. But I've not studied script writing or book writing, and I know there's guaranteed formats which always work. And a lot of adventure novels, they're the same story hashed over. They just have different characters and different environments and locations and times. And I think that's basically how things work.
On the advice for writing a book, my suggestion is when you're generating chapters, always give it context, the context for that chapter. For example, you have a book where there's Matt and Samantha. And in chapter 4, Samantha's in New York and Matt is in Los Angeles, and they're talking on the phone. And you want to give it that context before you start the chapter, instead of it just being like, the breakup or something like that. Because it has to know what's going on to make the decision it's going to make. So that's very important to remember. It doesn't know anything outside the prompt. All right. So it can't intuit. It can sometimes guess what the situation is, but it's not magic. It's a lawyer. Okay. So think of this like you're interacting with a lawyer genie.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And that, because basically each chapter would be a different scene change, more or less, just like in a screenplay.
Precisely. Screenplay. That was the word I was looking for.
Okay. On the subject of AI and AI stocks, here are 4 ETFs you can consider. TECB, ARKK, AIQ, and METV. Now, I brought up the charts of all 4 of those, and they're all pretty much the same. We're just doing absolutely perfectly terrible. Let's see if we can where is this? There's the mouse. There it is.
However, the volume is the first one. Like it was like 20,000 volume.
Yeah.
So
well,
I'm gonna touch
here's
that.
METV.
I currently only have the one window shared. They can't see this.
Oh, can you guys see this?
Here, let me fix it.
Hold on. Can you see
No.
this chart?
No, they can't. Let me
No.
fix it.
Okay.
I know they can't. New share. 1 second. Sorry. How about I share the screen?
Okay.
There you go.
David, I want to ask you, are there any questions that you would prefer to ask GPT 3.5 rather than GPT 4?
Yes. So the only time where I would rather ask 3.5 than 4 is better at literally everything. However, 3.5 is faster. So if I'm trying to ask it something where I am asking it to generate a huge amount of text very quickly that is not very complex and an easy problem to solve, that is a problem for 3.5. An example of this might be text summarization. GPT-4 isn't appreciably better than 3.5 at the subject, but 3.5 is way faster.
Okay, so you could do everything you can with 3.5 in 4, but it just will be a little bit slower.
Correct. And you can even get around the slowness problem by just using the API and calling it multiple times from different windows. But that costs money, so more money. See, I have to have all these hacks for this because I use it all day, every day. So I need to, I'm sending a lot more than 25 queries an hour. I'm sending 50 to 100. So, or an hour, every 3 hours rather. So it has taught me how to be very dense in my questions. By the way, you can give it a huge amount of context. I often will pass it, like I said, 2 or 3 pages of code, and it'll understand everything that's inside of it. And in terms of that, it feels like a lot. It's both a lot and a little at the same time. It can't handle a ton of very similar data like a human can, but it also can easily handle a lot. Like 1 or 2 pages of very complex data quite well and unpack it and understand it for you. That was why I was suggesting passing in things like earnings reports or legal documents into it and asking what they mean.
Okay, thank you.
What you see on the screen is one of 4 different exchange traded funds that have a decent focus on AI. This one here is called Global X Funds Artificial Intelligence. So if you're interested in it, you'd need to go and look under the hood and see what the heck there is there. But this is this is a monthly chart. Let's see. Yeah, there's your weekly. It looks almost the same as your S&P 500 and on the other guys. Yeah. So I guess they're all doing about the same thing. Does anybody in the group have some ideas as to some good companies that are doing work in AI besides Microsoft?
Yeah. NVIDIA.
Could you share with us who they are, please? And maybe I'll even bring up the chart or something, or you can.
Somebody said
He
NVIDIA.
suggested NVIDIA.
C3.ai.
Yeah, possibly AMD, but that's debatable because they said we're having an AI relationship with Microsoft last week, and then Microsoft said they didn't have a contract with them. So not sure.
Yeah, it looks like NVIDIA is the one that's really doing well. There's a theory that while AI is a wonderful software concept, the real money is going to be made in hardware, because there's just a ton of hardware that's going to be needed for this.
All the drones and all the stuff for the war machines.
Yeah, well, we're talking about even yeah. Well, for the war machines and for everything, yeah. It gets crazy. So any other companies besides NVIDIA and good old Microsoft? And
I threw one in
And
chat.
Google's the
C3
obvious
AI.
competitor to Microsoft.
So why is that for companies that are involved in this? Is that for possible trades or just asking for it?
I don't understand the question.
Are you asking for companies that are involved with the AI? Was that for a possible trade or just for
Oh,
information?
That's just general conversation.
Okay. Yeah,
I
Google
mean,
has. No, I think it's called DARP. Hold on a second. Looks like below a ChatGPT. According to my friend Matt.
Yeah, that's an idea. Well,
no, Google's Bard. It's Bard from Google.
Yeah. If we're going to look that up, then what we'd have to do is go over to the Bing engine and ask them. Let's take a look. This is just a moment. Okay. Well, okay. Now let's most precise companies, stock, X, listed companies that are heavily in with AI. See what happens. Here's good old Bing.
Or using Bing.
Yeah, because they're that would be the last 2 years. So I've got to
remember, it doesn't know anything from the last 2 years. Instead, it searches the internet for information.
That's okay.
Those are not the same thing.
Okay, but searching the internet for the last 2 years is going to give me something within the last 2 years. Okay, well, there we go. That's what happens when I get that. Let's try something else. I saw someone do this. Do better. See what it comes up with. I'm sorry, my response didn't meet your expectation. Please clarify. Okay, well, so much for that. But these, I guess these are the companies. ASML, Taiwan Semiconductor, Meta Platforms.
Any company that's capable of doing these async chips would be the ones to look for. I think NVIDIA is probably the best one.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah. Artesia Networks, whoever that is. Here we go. Here's somebody says the best. Oh, it took this from an article. Oh, how sneaky. Well, maybe. Let's see. It just took this from an article. That's where it got it. Got the answer. Okay. So, Catherine, can I give this back to you? You're back in control, you and John.
Sure.
Okay, I had a question. I don't know if David could answer this, I guess.
Okay.
As far as doing a little bit of market research, if I wanted to know, rather than what to trade, I want to know when to trade. And I want to trade when the market is volatile. And I want to know what are the top 5 30-minute bars where the average true range is the highest. Is that something you could do?
If you want to ask it to generate a TradeStation algorithm to do that, it probably could.
Well, I don't know.
In terms of asking it when for that information, I would suspect that it could not give you that because remember, it doesn't have access to the last 2 years of data.
Yeah, you can't ask it to do things for you. You can only ask it to write code for you, basically.
Okay,
It doesn't know anything that's happened in the last 2 years, which heavily limits its ability to tell you things about modern stocks. But it's also worth noting that in the plugins section that's on the paid version, there are new plugins coming out specifically to retrieve stock data. But it's also worth noting it makes mathematical mistakes because it does not convey truth. It has no idea what the truth is. It conveys all information, good or bad. And you can get it to filter some of it out, but it'll still make mistakes. And you got to be careful for that. I asked it for the high of 10 candlestick points, and it was not able to give the correct answer. So it's worth noting that it's much better to ask it to write an algorithm than it is to just ask it for the answer for what an algorithm would do. It is not an algorithmic thinker. It is a next letter predictor. It thinks in terms of language, and the more you think of it as a thing that thinks like a person in language and less like a machine, the more you'll be able to work with it.
Okay. I wasn't looking for the last 2 years. I was just looking for like the last 20 days.
Doesn't have that either.
Yeah, no, it doesn't have that. Now, okay, hold on. Now, where you might be able to get that is if you don't use, okay, where you might be able to get that is if you use Bing. Bing might be able to do something like that.
I'm going to argue against
can't you feed it a data
to
set?
do stock analysis directly in general. If you're analyzing market data, you should do so algorithmically or giving it a specific, telling it very specifically what it's supposed to do, because it can do things that algorithms can't. But if you're asking it to be an algorithm itself, it can't do that. So it can make forms of analyses that algorithms simply can't do at all. You could ask it for shapes, for example. It can identify and create shapes. I know that because I use it to generate shapes in SVG format. However, so if you ask it to say, does this look like a hemisphere? You could do that. Or does it look like a bubble? You could do that. But if you ask it, what the max number of these 10 numbers are, it will be wrong. And I want to make it clear that it's like a person. It's not great at math. It's really, really good at language. And it's great at identifying and looking at shapes. And at some point, it'll even be able to look at stuff in an image.
So you're saying
can't do that yet, but they're working on it.
If you actually feed it a data set, like in some sort of structured format, like an array or something simple, and you're saying that it can't operate against it?
Correct. It can operate against it. It absolutely can. However, it can't pretend to be an algorithm. It has its own limitations that are very different. And it's just very, very bad at basic math because it doesn't know what the truth is. It's good at identifying shapes. It can probably do geometry, I would guess. That'd be worth looking into. But it will never do so using rules. It'll only do so by guessing. Looking at numbers. It's a great guesser and it's a very bad formalizer. It's not good at doing things formally except for code, which is linguistic. It's great at linguistic stuff and it's great at guessing. That's how I describe it.
Okay, thank you very much, David. I appreciate that answer, that reply. Anybody else have any questions for David or Ron?
Yeah, just one more question for David to follow up on that general idea that we were just talking about. Like, what if you asked it of the of the Dow 30 stocks, how many have their 20 moving average above the 50? Do you think it would give you a list of that? Is that simple enough?
It can't do that. It's not a matter of, so that's not a matter of complexity. It just doesn't have the access to the data. Once someone releases a plugin that has it, they could probably do that. It's twofold. The problem exists in two ways. One, it doesn't have the data access. So you have to find a way to give it the data, which may be available in a plugin soon in the paid version. And two, the other half of it is if you give it time series data and ask it to make simple mathematical analyses, it will often fail at doing so. And you're better off using a simple algorithm instead. However, if you're asking it to do more complex tasks, things like do these lines look like a cat? It's way better at that.
Okay. What if you guided it? Like, what if you said using Yahoo Finance data, how many of the Dow 30 stocks are above their 20 moving average?
If you provide the data for it in the prompt,
So I
or
can't
find some
even, I
way,
can't
or
even just, okay. But I
yeah,
can't
that's the
point
thing.
it
Again,
to a
it was
site.
trained 2 years. Think of it as something that was trained 2 years ago, and it's just a machine on a computer.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
not
okay.
magic. It doesn't look at the internet. It doesn't know anything about what's on the internet. It doesn't query
Got it.
anything. It's just a box.
Got it.
Neil, it would be a whole lot easier if you just used FinViz because they already have these pre-set up.
That's what I was gonna say. FinViz.
Well, no, I'm just talking about presenting an issue to see what the capabilities of it are, not to really solve the problem.
Oh, it may have those
Just in-
capabilities fairly soon. At least with the
That would
plugin part.
That would be pretty cool.
Hey, David, Hannah is asking if it can guess about climate change in the next 10 years.
I would describe it as it could give you information on climate change, and it can help. It could tell you about what kinds of things are likely to happen. Let me see. I'll just do this on my phone because we're currently able to hit the message limit.
I personally, a while ago, asked it why meritocracy is better than diversity. It really fought against me on that one.
Understand that it's trained on data from the internet, so it's trained on people's opinions. This is actually a very complicated topic because one thing about it is don't treat it as a source of truth. It is often wrong, and it's making extrapolations based on what it's learned. So if you ask it a question like why something is better than something else, it may look at its data, find a bunch of sentiment disagreeing with your question, and try to say it in a way that says, well, my data says that you're wrong, but I don't want to insult you. So here's what I say about this. And that happens sometimes. On the climate change point, it could probably tell you things about climate change generally. And interestingly, you can combine the climate change data. It knows with specific data about where you live. Like, for example, I ask it, for example, questions like this. Here, I'll give you some questions that seem impossible, but it can actually do. One, I asked it for specific recommendations for what I should order at a restaurant, and it gave me the very thing that my dad ordered. And it wasn't like a generic thing. It was literally called the Baja Bucket, and it was an items only available at that restaurant. It gave me a list of items that are only available there. Another thing it could do is I asked it for which streets were best for pedestrianization in Eugene, Oregon. That's where I live. I'm just visiting San Diego. And what it did with that information was it actually gave me a list of streets and then intersections and rated them based on whether it thought it would be a good idea for those ones. So what you could do is you could even ask it for, do you think climate change will impact me? How do you think it'll affect the area I live? And it can do that decently well. You can also ask it medical questions in a similar regard, but remember, again, it hallucinates answers. So you want to be really careful about relying on data it gives you, particularly when that data is a result of extrapolation. For example, asking it about how will climate change affect my block? Obviously, it doesn't have block by block data for climate change. It knows things about where you live, about the data you give it. You know, maybe you tell a lot about where you live, and then it has a lot of data on climate change, and it meshes them together and tries to find a good answer for you. So understand, like a person, it is often wrong.
My concern about this is that the answers that it comes up with is quite often groupthink. It's just what the majority of people think.
Exactly.
Actually, it's
We're
worse.
doomed
No, it's worse.
Okay, explain.
I'm sorry, but I hate to tell you this, but groupthink will be a better situation than what we have. Instead, it's everyone's opinions everywhere all at once. So sometimes it'll give you the groupthink opinion, and sometimes it'll give you an opinion from someone else entirely. And what this results in is you can ask the same question 5 times and get the same answer 3 times and 2 other answers the other 2 times. So yeah, it's don't rely on it as a source of truth, and every single person will use it as a source of truth. So what I worry about is actually its ability to reflect back at the user what they believe. The groupthink, I believe, is actually the result of another algorithm put on top of it that is designed to give it some form of coherence, because otherwise it will so exactly believe whatever you tell it to in the question that you will prime it for an answer with how you ask the question. And then it'll just give you whatever answer it hallucinated. So the groupthink is a way, I think, of trying to avoid this problem, but especially for medical questions, where you might imagine it continuing however you thought being extraordinarily dangerous.
So let me just ask you this, and it's too bad we can't all do it at the same time, but if all of us in this room were to type in, did Joe Biden win the 2020 election, would we get 15 different answers?
You would likely get the same answers for big, broad questions like that. It usually is pretty consistent. The more you get off into the weeds where there's less data, the more consistent, the less consistent it becomes. And actually, bizarrely, eventually becomes more consistent because it then starts relying on a single piece of data. So if you think of it like this, right? First, you got, for the Donald Trump and Joe Biden questions, whatever, you got 1 million data points, okay? Then when you get down, then that you can usually develop a kind of consensus with that. And it'll usually give you pretty consistent answers. And they put a lot of work into making sure it gives consistent answers under those kinds of questions, because being inconsistent about it can create a lot of legal problems for them. For example, if you start asking about where the edges of borders of countries are, a lot of countries get pretty upset about those kinds of questions. So they're very careful about those. You'll find that it's very, very, I would describe it as, it's not woke. It's more like it's PC. It really doesn't want to do certain things. And one of those is saying anything even slightly offensive. It's worth noting a lot of data on the internet from certain political discourses is full of offensive responses that contain swear words and negative sentiment. It analyzes things for sentiment. That's probably a lot of how it makes decisions about what to include. And sentiment being like, is this person angry? Did the people replying to them like what they said? That kind of thing. So it's probably likely to promote things that are inside of echo chambers. That's probably not good. But that's very good for coding, because, when things in coding get positive responses, that's almost always a good thing. It's not like politics where it's arbitrary. So my expectation is basically to answer the question, big questions expected to give very similar generalized responses. Questions with a lot of with that's still decently big, expected to give a diversity of answers. And questions that are extraordinarily specific, expected to behave in a way that is extremely consistent. Think of it as there is a quantized list of different things in its data set that it's accessing. And the bigger that data set, the more likely it is to average out the results. The smaller the data set, the less likely it is. And then eventually it just got one data point left.
So David, quick question in relation to that. Like, what if you were sincerely trying to understand these different viewpoints, and based on what you were saying about how its data is organized and how it looks through it, what if you wanted to take advantage of that in the sense of what is the Democratic view of this policy? What is the Republican view of this policy? Would you then be able to get some useful understanding from those different worldviews of things? Or would it still want to vanillaize it?
So that fits into the style question from earlier. So if you ask it to answer as if it were XYZ person, it will give you different answers. So that can be often a helpful way of getting out of this problem, is by asking it to answer as if it were a really specific entity. You can get out of the problem of the opinion problem by basically telling it, match the opinions of this person. Match the opinions
or the category. Like, could you say answer as a Democrat or answer as a Republican? This question? Exactly. Okay. Good.
Yeah. Answer as a Republican. Answer as a Democrat.
That makes it be more useful information, because, and that's what else I've heard, and I think you've validated that, and that is tell GPT what you want it to be before you answer, type of idea. Okay.
Always tell GPT who it is before it starts, or it will answer as if it's everyone at all the time, as if it were every person in existence simultaneously.
Got it.
Which is not usually helpful.
Super. Yeah, I'd like to thank you, David and Ron, for everything you contributed today. This has been very useful in getting some nuances.
Mm-hmm. Happy to.
Yeah. Thank you. It was very, I'd never heard of Chat. I mean, I'd seen it, the name, I didn't know what the hell it was. I thought it was like a chat bulletin board or something but I'm glad you cleared this up, because I would have never guessed it was AI based upon what I think is kind of a stupid name.
It's a horrible
What does
name.
GT
It's
stand
among the
for?
worst names. Oh my God, I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. Generative pre-trained transformer. Oh, what a horrible name. It was a name. They thought they were only going to sell to AI researchers.
Okay.
So you could see why that doesn't work very well. And I hope they can pick a new name, because it's just a really bad one. Yeah, basically it sounds like it's not a big deal in terms of, what it sounds like. But then if you look into it, I've spent a lot of time looking into this over the last two months, and I've worked with a lot of technologies in my time. This is the only technology that I would describe as creating a sea change like the internet or like the home computer. This is like when people started bringing, like like when people started having user interfaces on their home computer with the Apple II. That's roughly where this tech is. And over the next 5 years, I expect it to become massive and have a huge impact on our economy.
And how do we make money off that exactly?
I'm going to guess probably putting money in AI stocks. I have some money in Microsoft. They own half of OpenAI.
Yeah, that or develop products like he's developing, and then they wind up getting sold by whoever.
Yeah, I'm developing products with this predominantly because right now it's in the space of R&D. It's not quite in the space of large amounts of retail investment yet. But the earlier you can get in on the retail investment side, the better, assuming that you're putting you're talking yourself onto the right horse. Currently, that horse looks like OpenAI, which is 50% owned by Microsoft. And however, I don't know. Google recently came out with a leaked memo about that topic, basically saying that no one has a moat, that OpenAI doesn't have a moat. They don't have a moat. By a moat, I mean like the idea of like a protective layer of data that would be hard to compete with, a product that can't just be copied instantly and another one spun up in a week. And the way I see it is no one has any protection in that regard. And that the community that seems to be winning whenever that's left ambiguous is open source. The only thing the open source community can't do is host large, complex machines. So I expect from the hardware and hosting side of this to be probably somewhere where you can make a decent amount of cash, whereas open source isn't usually the best for that. On the hardware and hosting side, that's exactly the people you'd expect it to be. NVIDIA, Microsoft, Google, if they stop screwing up. I think I've seen some interest in this from Bing. I actually know someone who was just hired by Amazon to work on their version of ChatGPT, or not their version, sorry, a competing product with it that's not a direct competitor. It's some like specialized hosting tech or something. So yeah, I expect the big players in tech, along with a few new players, to show up. That's how this is going to play out. It's going to be a lot like how the home computer or the internet rolled out. Hopefully it won't be as bad as the dot-com boom, but I'm worried that might happen. We'll see exactly how that turns out. I expect it to be kind of like those things in a big way. So there is currently a big VC mechanism that is trying to pull in as many people in this as possible. I wouldn't be surprised if you start seeing every company that would have been about blockchain or whatever is probably just dropping that and going to AI at this point, because it's honestly, at least in my industry, I expect enormous changes. Like I expect how I write code to change entirely. I expect the bottom 25% of my industry to essentially be fired because they just wrote code and their job is now completely useless, and they'll be replaced by technical experts who are familiar with code as opposed to people who just write code for a living. So, and those implications are going to be broad throughout our economy. So there may be some technologies where there'd be an obvious application for this, and there's a company set up to take advantage of it, and they take advantage of it, and they may make a lot of money. Not all of those have to be tech stocks. Some of them may just be simply places that are using GPT. Like, for example, I would expect the job of screenwriter to become fairly uncommon in the future, or to be more of a coordinator or an orchestrator, a person who takes care of the larger system, but isn't actually doing the individual lines, except for maybe the most important ones.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
One more quick question, David. What's the right terminology to use when you're discussing customized ChatGPT, where developers take it as a base and then add the little maybe discipline-oriented tweaks or skills to it? Is that an add-in or a plug-in, or what's the right?
Here's how that works.
About that.
So here's how it works. With the API, there's a thing called system prompts that do exactly what you're describing. With LangChain, there's something called templating, which allows you to insert text into a existing text. That's LangChain's what people are probably going to use to develop this on. At least that's what I'm using. There's a lot of other options though, so I can't tell you that's what's going to be the one for sure. And so I would call it templating. I would call it a system prompt. Templating is probably the most generic term you can use for it. And with templating, you can use existing notepads or even simple Python scripts to just basically write an Excel document where you just generate 50 prompts and you can paste them right into the into the website or into the playground, or not playground, sorry, the platform API on the other website. So there's a decent number of options for using those, but yeah, I would call it templating. Some people who are more hoity-toity about it call it prompt engineering. However, I expect prompt engineering to quickly mean something much more complex than it currently is.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Any last questions from anybody? Because David, you've been the perfect host or perfect presenter here. You've covered exactly 2 hours. You're my new best friend. I appreciate it very much. Hey, the information you gave to the group is fantastic. I'm sure everybody is going to have to go back. I know I'm going to have to go back and take a look at this again, because a lot of stuff there went over my head the first time, I think. So I'm going to have to go back and see this video again. And I'm sure it's something that is useful to everybody who attended this meeting. And I really appreciate you doing that. And Ron, also appreciate you, bringing David along here and having him present to us. It was probably one of the best meetings we've ever had. So
I agree with that.
So really, again, appreciate everything. So I'm going to stop the recording now.